Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom has provided the boring part. He needed somebody to whistle when you all fell asleep. Now, there's nobody with a whistle for me, so you know I have the exciting part, the fun part. What happens when there's a main motion and it's somebody that you don't like? Well, there's all kinds of rules that we have that we can fix that person. Absolutely. And we're going to go through those. There's those subsidiary types of motion, and what a subsidiary motion is, it's one that relates to the main motion. It's going to do something for the main motion. It can modify the main motion, or it's going to dispose of the main motion. And there's several of those, and we're going to go through them one by one, and I'll explain a little bit about how they're going to be used, so you'll have a chance to use them when our president is up here and we're going to have fun with him. The first one is you want to get rid of a motion. What are you going to do if you want to get rid of a motion? You postpone indefinitely. Have you ever heard of that? Get rid of it? Postpone indefinitely. Now, why would you want to postpone a motion indefinitely? Well, it's because it's a motion that should not be decided by the organization, by the club. A good example of this is the recent election that we had for president. We had 2 people running, which is wonderful. But what if somebody had made a motion that the club endorsed one of the candidates? Now, we would not want to do that. First of all, if the club did that and passed that motion, the individual who was the opponent would be very upset. And if we voted on the motion and it failed, then the one that the motion was made for would be very upset. So that was something you do not want to take up. Now, we don't have a problem like that this often, but in political organizations they do. In primaries, they don't want to go on record often to endorse a candidate because they may end up endorsing the wrong one. So you postpone indefinitely, and that's a way to get rid of a main motion without having to take a vote on it. And then there's something that you're all familiar with, the amendment. We've all done that. And amendments are used in about 3 different ways. First of all, they have to be germane to the main motion. It has to be something that applies to the main motion. What it can do for the main motion, it can be an extension of the main motion. You can add something to the main motion. Or you can delete something that's part of the main motion. Or you can substitute something for part of the main motion. For example, if somebody had made a motion that we should buy an automobile by July 1st for the club president, I'm sure somebody would say, well, we may not have enough money and we should not spend more than $300. That's an addition to the main motion. And I'm sure somebody else would think, $300? It's going to take more than July 1st to find a car for $300 that's worthwhile. Let's eliminate by July 1 and leave it wide open. And somebody else may think, well, we may get somebody in there who doesn't like an automobile. We may have somebody who wants a big truck. So I make a motion that we delete automobile and substitute vehicle. So that's the 3 ways you can use amendments. But they all have to be germane to the main motion to be introduced. And then there's the 3rd way you can do it. You can refer to a committee. Why would you ever refer something to a committee? Well, first of all, if there's a lot of discussion going on, it may be getting late, there may be people leaving the meeting, you may want to have a smaller group come up with a decision and a recommendation to the main body, so you've referred to the committee. Now, if the club has a committee, you could make the motion that I move that we refer it to and name the committee. Now, if you don't have a committee, you could just make a motion that, Mr. President, I move that you appoint so many members to a committee to look at this particular issue and report back at the next meeting or the meeting after that. So you have a smaller group who's going to maybe do some of the research that can't be done by the larger group. So that's the 3rd way you can do it. The 4th way you can see here is postpone to a later date. Now, we talked about, first of all, postponing indefinitely, which really means you never vote on it. But there may be a reason, again, to postpone it so that the main body can discuss something. And you'll say, let's postpone it to the next meeting and let the major body still consider it. We don't want it to go to a committee and have a smaller body look at it, but we want to keep it intact for the main body itself. So you just postpone it to your next meeting or the meeting after that. Then you'll bring it up. And then you see you got here an issue to limit or extend debate. Often things get so involved that people want to keep debating it, and somebody can say, Mr. President or Mr. Chairman, I think we should limit debate until midnight, and after midnight we'll have to vote on it. Or maybe we want to do something different and say only one person from each side can vote on it, or we should limit debate to 5 minutes. Or if we have a limitation already on debate, somebody would move that we extend the debate. So that's what you want to do. That is another one of the subsidiary motions. Then you see here we have the previous question. And we've heard this many times. Somebody will say, Mr. President or Mr. Chairman, I call the question. And what you often find people do erroneously is they will vote on the matter. Well, the previous question is a motion. And if it's second, what it means that body has to decide whether or not they want to limit the debate. And since you're limiting the debate for number 5, which would be to limit the discussion, or number 6, which is to call the previous question, that takes the 2/3 vote that Tom had talked about earlier. These other subsidiary motions have to be voted on as a majority person. And then the 7th one is lay on the table. And we've done that before. If you have something that cannot be decided on this evening, or whatever night is that you are having a meeting, you lay it on the table and you'll bring it up perhaps at the next meeting or some other time. And those are the 7 subsidiary motions. Now they all deal, as you can see, with the main motion, and once they're passed, they will do something to the main motion. They're either going to modify it or they're going to eliminate it by getting rid of it. So those are subsidiary motions. But there's also a set of motions under Bob's rules. Well, I've done Robert's rules so long, I just call them Bob. Under Bob's rules that are privileged motions. And you see we put up here on the screen, call the order of the day. Recall Tom put up here when he gave his presentation the sequence of business that we have, and that's the order of the day. That's the way our business has to be run. Now you could have somebody, for whatever reason, may not want to bring up something. If there's some unfinished business that maybe the president disagrees with and he does not want it brought forward, he may skip over that. Well, as a member of the club, you can call for the order of the day, and it's up to the president to go back to that order and bring forth that unfinished business. Or perhaps under the committee reports, he had skipped over the committee reports accidentally, and you wanted to find out what the treasurer's balance was. You could call for the order of the day to make sure that the treasurer gets to give his or her report. So all that does is keep you going in sequence, and all the parts of the order of business are taken care of. And then there's the raise a question of privilege. Now sometimes we get somebody that doesn't hear very well, and they may raise the question of privilege and ask somebody to speak up. You know, it has happened. We've had people in here that didn't hear that well. Or it could be, you could say it's too hot in here or too cold in here. And these are questions of privileges, and you can interrupt the speaker when you raise these questions, because these are things that have to be taken care of immediately, and they don't apply to the main motion. It's something that necessarily has to be done. Maybe you think we've been debating long enough. Maybe you thought, well, we've heard enough of Carl. I think we'll have a recess for 10 minutes so I can go out and get a stiff drink or whatever you want to do on a recess. But that's what you want to do. And then adjourn. Well, we all know what adjournment is. You know, that's when we want to finish the meeting. And we can have somebody, you know, if you get somebody to make that motion to adjourn, and then you get a second, and that's voted on by a majority of the people, then the business ends that time. And sometimes we don't have a time to adjourn. In our club, it's not a problem. We have fixed times in which we do everything. But in some organizations, they may not have a fixed time to adjourn. And you may say, Mr. Chairman, I would like the meeting to adjourn at a certain time. You are fixing the time to adjourn. And these are your privileged motions that you have. They have nothing to do, as I said, with the main motion, but they're something that are important enough that they have to be dealt with right away. Now we have your incidental motions. An incidental motion is just something that Bob didn't know where to put it. So he puts it as an incidental motion. And there's a point of order. And we have used point of order before, and I'm sure you've heard it. It's where something is done incorrectly by the chair. For example, if the body has already decided to lay something on the table, but yet the chair still allows someone to talk on that motion, somebody can make a point of order and say, Mr. Chairman or Mr. President, the organization, the club has already voted to lay it on the table. That should cease discussion. Now, what could happen, it's up to the chair to decide. All these motions, the chair decides on these motions. And he could disagree with whoever makes those motions. Well, then what you do is have the opportunity to appeal. You can make an motion to appeal from the ruling of the chair if you disagree with what the chair states. And what it takes, of course, and you can look at the sheet that we've handed out, if you make your motion and you get the majority of the members to agree with you that the chair was wrong, then the ruling of the chair would be reversed. And the way you do this, once you make the motion to appeal, it gives the chair an opportunity to explain why he or she made that particular ruling, and then the person who disagrees with it has an opportunity to explain why the chair was wrong, and then they usually let the chair have the concluding remark, again explaining why he or she made that ruling before there's a vote upon it. But that's another one of your many incidental motions. Okay. Then there's a point of information. All that is to get some information that you may need to rule on a main motion. For example, if we're dealing with a main motion that's going to require the expenditure of funds of the club, it would be relevant to ask how much money do we have in the treasurer's balance to find out whether that motion actually should be made. And that would be a point of information that you would raise. And we've probably done it informally. Now we want to suspend the rules, and you can do that. Now you can't suspend the bylaws, but some of the rules, for example, the order of the day, if you wanted to go out of sequence, you can do that by suspending the rules. And the reason you would do that is perhaps the treasurer is going to leave and would not be available when it's time for the committee report, and you want to find out what the balance is in the treasury. You may ask that the rules be suspended because the treasurer is going to leave and you'd like to get the treasurer's report at this time. So they've thought of everything Bob has. You can agree, you could object to consideration of the question. So that would mean that you just don't want that to come forward. And that's another way to keep a main motion from being voted on. You can object to it, and if you get the people to vote in favor of that, then there will be no ruling on the main motion at all. Division of the question, that happens whenever it's necessary to find out what is going to happen, and you want to break down the question. If the question can be broken down into two parts, like if you wanted to talk about having a summer picnic in August at a certain park, Susan Park. Well, maybe somebody would want to break it down and say, let's first talk about whether or not we wanted to have a picnic in August, which is hot, and then bring up the second part of it, whether or not we even want to do it at Susan Park or at another park. So you break up the motion that way. Then there's consideration of the paragraph. That's a enumeration. You know, if the big health care bill, how many paragraphs there are, if you want to understand that, you want to do that paragraph by paragraph. We'd probably still be discussing that today. And then the last one is the division of the assembly. When they say ayes or nays and you disagree with whether the ruling of the chair is, rather than asking for an appeal, you can just say you would like a division of the question, have people either raise their hand if they're for, or stand up if they're for, and that would show you just what the division is. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.